Hello, and welcome to the second talk in the New York Botanical Gardens Landscape Design Portfolio Lecture Series. My name is Lisa Whitmer. I'm the Director of Adult Education, and I'm so thrilled to have each of you in attendance and to have Bree and Gina here with us tonight. So before we start this presentation, I'd like to go over just a bit of housekeeping before we begin. If you would like to utilize the closed captioning that we have available, you will see on the bottom of your screen a CC button that says live transcript. You can click on that, and then the captions will start. You can see some options in there to customize per your desire. We will definitely be taking some questions from the audience at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and submit a question at any time during the presentation. Don't be shy. It's not going to pop up on the screen or anything. It will not interrupt the flow of the talk. And I will be back at the end of the presentation to ask as many of your questions as time allows. Lastly, as far as housekeeping, I just wanted to let those of you who need or want CEUs know that we will be sending an email out after the presentation is over, probably tomorrow, that has the quiz that you'll need to take in order to get those CEUs. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our two presenters tonight, Gina Ford and Bree Hensoldt, who will be in conversation together. Gina Ford is the co-founder and principal of Agency Landscape and Planning in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a practice dedicated to addressing social equity, cultural vitality, and environmental resilience. Gina's work graces public and private spaces in many states nationwide, and she's won awards for her work from ASLA, the American Planning Association, and AIA, to name a few. She received the Harvard Graduate School of Design's Charles Eliot Traveling Fellowship and Wellesley College's Shaw Fellowship. She sits on the board of the Cultural Landscape Foundation, and she was the endowed chair in design and planning at the University of Texas at Austin School of Architecture. She's also a thought leader dedicated to diversifying the landscape architecture profession and strengthening the ability of designers to best meet the needs of those they serve. While her own design and technical skills are highly lauded, she has emphasized that it is our softest skills, communication, leadership, empathetic listening, that will enable successful engagement and positive design outcomes. If we embrace humanism as a core value in our profession, we truly can overcome the seemingly Herculean challenges that we face. In addition to making change in the profession, she also sounds like a lot of fun. She recently told Architalks that if she weren't an architect, she would be playing poker professionally. So I'm going to bet on Gina, and we're so delighted to have you here with us tonight. She is joined by a co-founder of Agency, urban planner Bree Hensoldt, who is also principal of the Agency Landscape and Planning. Bree holds a master's in urban planning with an urban design concentration from the Harvard Graduate School of Design and a Bachelor of Arts in Architectural Studies from Rice University. Her work has also received numerous awards, and she is also a design critic in the Department of Urban Planning and Design at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, where she teaches an executive education course in resilient cities. So Bree and Gina, thank you so much. Huge warm welcome from NYBG. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Lisa. We're so incredibly honored to be here. And as you mentioned, Bree and I will be going back and forth, but I'll kick us off just with a very warm thank you to Susan Cohen, the Herculean talent that is Susan Cohen, for initiating and getting us to be in this esteemed crowd, this incredible series of speakers of whom we have incredible respect for. And we love this topic. We love the idea of thinking about at the water's edge, this sort of seam between water and land, and this really special and magic place that human beings really want to occupy, that we, Bree and I, have spent a lot of our time and energy thinking about in our professional career. So we'll talk a little bit, start with talking a little bit about Agency, the company that we formed and why we formed it and why we formed it as a planner and a landscape architect together, why that's meaningful. Bree will talk a little bit about our philosophy, and then we're going to share 3 case studies with you. Chicago, which is featured here, the Chicago Riverwalk, just one of a past project, as well as 2 ongoing projects at Agency, recently completed and ongoing projects, I should say, at Agency. Let's see if I can advance my slides well. Okay. So when you come to create a business, naming yourself is a really important thing. And Bree and I both fell in love with the idea about calling ourselves Agency because we love the double meaning or triple meaning maybe of it as folks that practice in the public sector. The kind of pun of being part of bureaucracy is core to our practice. But also, I think this idea that agency is a philosophical strand. It's an idea that we're actually the sort of creatures of our own destiny. We're the choosers of our path, and that we really can be the agents of change to make our own path forward. And so as we came to think about naming our firm, we loved the idea of agency, landscape, and planning, because I think, as the title of the talk is called, we really believe that planning can remove barriers and that design in and of itself is an act of optimism. And at Agency, we really believe that we, in working with community, can initiate and make purposeful and positive change. And so that's always been a core tenet of what we believe in design, and one we want to see a practice through. So we're this interesting combination. We don't see many practices that are at this intersection between planning and landscape architecture. A lot of times when people think about planning, they think about it as sort of an upstream of design proposition, that there's a strategy that's moved through community engagement at a planning scale. There's a kind of moment of pausing and waiting, as this says, hopes, dreams, waiting, fundraising, political will is being built. And then there's this movement through the implementation of projects through design, and specifically in our kind of realm, landscape architecture. So while that might be a typical process, we really see there's incredible value to thinking about it more as these parallel streams, that planning and strategy, that landscape architecture and design and community engagement can be these parallel streams that are constantly informing each other. And so as we thought about that and we think about that, we really believe that agency, in the leadership that Bree and I bring and our professional expertise and our commitment to our disciplines, really serve the world best when they run side by side and constantly intersect. And so where Bree, as a planner, leads the thinking in our practice around large scale shifts like climate change and demographic patterns, she thinks about economics and kind of human infrastructure behind change. I'm the more kind of physical design thinker around ecological design systems and how people use public space and how they're maintained over time, and of course how they're made beautiful. And we think that this intersection of these 2 streams is really where the most powerful and beautiful design can happen, where we see resilience and cultural change, where we get a sense of longevity and community benefit. So here we are, and that's our commitment to each other, is that we will forge this practice together that is this side-by-side strand of these two disciplines working together constantly. And it's not new to us. We actually have been working together for quite a while, for over 2 decades, and then a decade together. Bree and I were both senior leaders in a practice called Sasaki here in Boston, and as part of that work, in lots of years together, we led a lot of that firm's public work and had incredible exposure to great projects all over the country, and worked on all these types of projects, from waterfronts to public spaces to downtown, bringing together those ideas of planning and landscape architecture. And so we had this incredible body of work that spanned all of these different kinds of challenges, and decided in late 2017, early 2018, to start our own practice that could really address these more fully. And I think really important to that is thinking about, again, this idea that community engagement is that unifying thread between our 2 disciplines that really brings together the work. And so we love thinking about how community can be part of a process of co-creation, of how we can draw stories, write stories with community, how we can really help them and give them tools to visualize the kind of change they want to be part of, or the kind of stability they seek, and really finding creative and fun ways to really get that as part of a meaningful and integrated design process. And we're really happy to say we're in our heading into our closing of our third year of practice, and in this brief couple of years together, we've had the great pleasure of working on incredible work around the country, all of it predominantly serving a kind of public good. Everything coded here in purple is really more on the planning end of the spectrum, and the green projects are more on the build side of the spectrum, and then lots of these overlap and intersect. But as you can see, many of them waterfronts, many of them critical public spaces or systems of public spaces in American cities.
And often what's fascinating, I think, is that, the development of cities is often clustered around waterfronts. And so we've had a fascinating career thinking about waterfronts and what they mean for design as well as planning and kind of human occupation. And that can span everything from really large projects like the Highline Canal, which looked at a 78-mile long corridor, recreational corridor, water corridor outside of Denver and in Denver. Another large-scale project with changing course, looking at the entire Mississippi Delta and dreaming up ideas for, thinking about the really big challenges of subsidence and sea level rise, to really small sites back home here in Boston, activation in the seaport, trying to think about how do we create places that attract more diverse use throughout the day. So what's fascinating to us is that these waterfronts are a touchstone for communities, and they operate at all scales. And they are really at the heart of change that the whole country is navigating right now, wicked change, as Gina might say. She is Boston born and bred. And that change, we often think about climate change here on the coast as being really tied to flooding, hurricanes, sea level rise, storm surge. We did a lot of work post-Sandy and with the National Disaster Resilience Competition, but that it's also, climate change isn't monolithic. And so we're learning about the wildfires, earthquakes, Tornado Alley, and the challenges that brings to communities. And it's been fascinating to work with those communities and understand what this means to their lives, how design can be optimistic as a moment within a recovery process or a rebuilding process, but that it's really, really needs to be tied to cultural meaning. And a hello from my daughter in the background. I gather from Gina's smile, you can hear her. And that culture is evolving across our country. And so cultural meaning is evolving with it. And this map is showing sort of places where there is a predominant minority population. And we always look to that in our planning and design to kind of understand who the community was, who it is, and what the future looks like. And we love bringing together people through planning and design processes that might not have had conversations before, and seeing what that can do to change minds and ideas, talking to youth to understand what's important for next generations, or older adults who are looking to age in place and looking for their community to meet their new needs. And, a map that I think is perhaps extra relevant today, and maybe will change in a couple of weeks, but politics are really front of mind, I think, for everyone everywhere right now. And we know that it is particularly divisive. And when we work really all across the country, as Gina showed, we look for ways to overcome some of those divisions. And we look to places, cities, parks, the public realm, to be places where everyone can be together, enjoy the outdoors together, and find a moment where that division can be navigated. And so tonight, I think I'll pass it back to Gina. We're going to share 3 of those stories that were written with the community along a few of these different waterfronts.
And we'll talk first about Chicago Riverwalk, a project that has been completed and opened for a few years now. So a project is sort of in our recent past. The White River Vision Plan, which was a large-scale regional plan that we just wrapped up as agency in this past year. And then the Sarasota Bay Park, which is a project we've been working on that's ongoing and hopefully will continue to move forward for many years. So kind of a little bit of a cross-section of time for us as well as scale. And we'll start with the Chicago Riverwalk. one of the most beautiful and incredible sites in our great country that I had the great opportunity of being part of a project to transform. So a little bit of Chicago. This is Grant Park, as you see lower right. The Chicago River is the main branch, which runs east-west through the north side of the downtown loop, and then branches off into a north and south branch. Prior to any work we had done on the riverfront, there was a east end that was self-performed by the Chicago Department of Transportation, a kind of really modest trail and connection. Then building on that success, they hired a firm led by, a team led by Collins Engineering with Ross Barney Architects to do a few blocks, which we call phase one, a very sexy name. And that had even more success. And so then there was a phases 2 and 3, this kind of last segment of the riverfront connecting the work in the last 6 blocks to the confluence of the rivers. And this is where I had the great opportunity of getting involved with our previous firm at Sasaki. Sasaki was the prime consultant for the team that was selected by the Chicago Department of Transportation, a kind of unusual client in that they're engineering, but they valued design. And we worked hand in hand collaboratively with an incredible broad team, all based in Chicago, except for Sasaki, and really headed on our partner side by Ross Barney Architects, a really titan of Chicago architecture. And so this incredible team that's equal parts sort of landscape architecture, and engineering, looking at the site. A very grainy, and I apologize, image of a kind of Burnham's vision. Burnham really established a vision for the Chicago lakefront, which transformed it from an industrial conduit to really something that had civic presence and this kind of Beaux-Arts quality, and really transformed also just the function of the city, that there would be this upper level that would be less flood prone, less mucky, kind of city level, and a lower level which would service that, and that set up this kind of architecture of the river, which is really iconic of Chicago. And if you're looking at this image, you see that there's these kind of walkways down at the lower level that engage with the river and have these passages through the bridge houses that lead you around on this continuous walk. And so a really lovely turn of the century, last century vision for what the riverfront could be, it's kind of partially realized when we came on board. You see these incredible Beaux-Arts bridge houses. Our site was this left-hand side of this image, which is the south side of the Chicago River. I'll keep flipping back and forth, but you'll see it on the bottom in a moment. These incredible Beaux-Arts bridge houses, these really hulking industrial bridges, these kind of layering of all these parts of Chicago's history, really beautiful skyscraper kind of canyon of space. But the real challenge here was that the Riverwalk, as it existed prior to our engagement, was just a block long. You couldn't move from one room to the next. You had to go up and down to the street level to engage with the river, and so it meant you had this series of spaces that were really underutilized, kind of dead end spaces. And so we were hired by the Department of Transportation to really thread together these spaces with one continuous new construction, so land on water, to knit them together. Now you see our sites across the bottom of the image. We were given by Act of Congress the ability to add 25 and 20 feet of new land out into the river. That is limited really by the ability to keep the shipping channel, which is still active, and create safe harbor for boats. So a kind of busy street, as it were, that the river is. And we had this really incredible challenge of a tremendous amount of vertical grade change between the city level, about 20 feet of grade change, 17 feet between the upper level and the riverfront level where it sat. But perhaps even more challenging was really that upper Wacker Drive level, which you see here in this axonometric, and the dock wall, which was our existing condition, had this big grade change between them. But importantly, the dock wall elevation was still about 7 feet higher than the normal pool of the Chicago River. So you had this disconnect as you moved along the river. You couldn't really move along the river, but you also had a disconnect vertically where you never really got close to the water's edge. And that's very intentional in a lot of ways, because the river itself is a controlled body of water. So it never hits a point higher than a certain elevation before they open the locks and drain it to the lake. But it has this kind of big dynamic horizon of about 7 feet. So that dock wall was set just at that right elevation so that it would never see flood water, which is great if you don't want to get your feet wet. It's really bad if you want to get your feet wet. So a real challenge for us as we thought about it. Our idea was really to think about and reimagine that circulation system, this new connective thread, as a place to really engage with the water. And so we started thinking about this idea that this new path that we were allowed to build could become this sculptural thread, that it could change and shape and form in each of these blocks or rooms, as we called them, to really embrace different kinds of program, to kind of create different experiences and different water-themed spaces. And that by necessity of the idea really should get down as close to the water as possible and really engage. And so here you see, and I'll walk you through these as they were realized, the marina, the cove, the river theater, the swimming hole, the jetty, and the boardwalk. We gave them names to really signal the idea that they were river-inspired design spaces. This project was, this is kind of, so I showed you the early concept drawing. This is actually the final kind of design drawing as it was realized. We opened 2 phases of the project. Phase 2 opened in June of 2015. Phase 3 opened in October of 2016 and actually kind of trailed into 2017 as well, a really complicated process. Talk about funding and how that was made possible in a moment. But here's the space prior to construction. As you can note, all the things I talked about, that high dock level wall, the inability to get close to the water, the inability to walk along the water. And I'll show you the transformation. And so here's the realized work, which again, drops the main walkway down as close to the water as we could get it, allows for boat docking and boat engagement and water engagement the entire length of this 300-foot long space, knits together, threading underneath the bridges, new land, kind of building and weaving in and out. And really important to our concept and the way we imagined the space was that it wasn't just about a walkway, but it's about a series of places that the walkway connects. And so we have very little tight little rooms of space, but we really wanted to maximize those to make them as people-friendly as possible. So this first space is really all about dining and sitting by the water, being close to the boats, made iconic by this continuous, again, 300-foot long bench that also serves as a bar for the upper level. So this kind of urban furniture that unites and provides kind of a functional kind of partie to the space. Really beautiful. Again, every square inch of this space was about getting places for people. So whether that was being perched up high, drinking a glass of wine, what a dream, looking out at the Chicago River, walking past on the walkway, sitting along the walkway, or getting close to the water, even as close to put your feet in the water. Everything we could do to kind of make this a really friendly section and a really human-centric section for the river. And it's beautiful when it's packed full of people, which it often is in the summertime, you know, pre-pandemic and hopefully post-pandemic, but also just incredibly beautiful as this conduit for city dwellers to move to and from work and home, even at the quietest of times. The second in the series of the spaces is called the Cove. This was a space that we designed specifically for human-powered craft, growing use of the river in terms of recreational boating. So from you see these kind of larger recreational boats to small human-powered craft. So much more of that happening now as the river has moved away from being predominantly industrial. And so we wanted to create a place that felt like an urban beach, where instead of kind of stones and sand, we would have these precast elements that would really offer that kind of seating and kind of casualness. All of the dimensions of the space are really low. The stairs are broad and wide. It's meant to be kind of like this really shallow beach form. And working with Terry Ryan, the incredible landscape architect, established a plant palette in this space that really speaks to this beachy quality, birches and grasses that really kind of define and make this unique among spaces. So here you see this kind of custom seating elements. You also see that there's this arcade, which is the architectural expression of the Wacker Drive, which we were able to make into functional spaces that could change over time. So we were really pleased in the first summer when Urban Kayaks took on one of the spaces, and this actually became a place where you could get out onto the water. So a real gateway to the experience of the river. And as you can see, lots of little nooks and crannies, this idea of path and place, kind of making places for people to move by, but also to stop and engage with the river. And we're really pleased that you do actually see kayakers taking this opportunity to park for a minute, take some safe haven, maybe get an ice cream cone, use a restroom, the kind of things that were lacking previously in the river experience brought to life here through this work. As I mentioned, Ross Barney Architects was our partner architect, and Carol and her firm were really dedicated to this idea of the Wacker Drive sidewalk in one of the spaces folding down and becoming the staircase to the river. Very hard to do given how little space we had horizontally and how much vertical change there was, but an incredible engineering feat to make this what they called the Stramp or Super Stramp, eventually the River Theater, this kind of large scale amphitheater seating with this sliced ramp through it that allows ADA access from upper level to lower level. It's really, I think, one of the most iconic pieces of the Riverwalk in just its pure scale, this kind of 300-foot long kind of amphitheater that, as you can imagine, when they dye the river green in Chicago, which they do annually, this is packed full of people watching that incredible event on the river. And what I really love about it is that you also get a lot of individual folks coming to enjoy it. It really welcomes a kind of find your own place among the trees that I think is a really lovely counterpoint to some of the other blocks. And as I mentioned, this kind of ramp that sculpturally slices through that really enables that passage from upper level to lower level seamlessly. Carol's firm also led the design and construction of the space called the Water Plaza, which was an idea about an interactive water space that would enable kids and families to have a place to frolic in the water next to the river's edge. Really imagined it as a place where you could see the river while touching water. And then last of the series, and if I'm being honest, my favorite, this is called the Jetty. When we first came to Chicago, we saw a floating wetland pilot project that was done by the Friends of the Chicago River. It was really like a little tiny installation that was meant to prove that maybe you could make some small form of habitat inexpensively with, I always say it's like milk jugs and plants, but it was a really simple contraption. And the moment I saw it, it's a little green island floating in this sea of gray. From the very moment I saw it, I thought we really need to make a space that really creates floating wetlands in mass. And so this room is entirely dedicated to the idea of the floating wetland and the aquatic habitat that floating wetlands create through fish. So this kind of cycle between recreational fishing, fish habitat, and aquatic species. And very complicated engineering feat to try to get these floating wetlands to float and to try to get them to survive against what's at times really intense wave action, but really pleased after the first couple of seasons of planting and understanding what grows well here, that we have this really robust carpet of green. And when you walk by, you actually hear these things clink and move together with the flow of the river during normal days, and you actually get to see them, as you see on the right, rise and fall with the river's elevation. So it really becomes a register of the river's changing dynamics. And this image on the left, I always love to talk about that railing, which I think was a really spectacularly sublime little design detail. We didn't, by code, need a handrail here. We got away in a lot of the instances along the project without a railing, but it felt important to give people a place to perch on these little piers. And the driver of this was that the lower rail is actually the height of someone sitting in a wheelchair fishing. And then at the corners, we popped it up for a standing person to fish. So we really wanted to do this design piece that was really flexible to lots of different kinds of bodies and users and abilities. And what's really beautiful is a lot of what you can't see in the jetty, which is a whole lot of fish infrastructure that attaches to the underside of the piers. These really incredible low-cost aquatic habitat infrastructures like fish lunkers and hula skirts that are attached to the poles that start to create a kind of nightclub for fish that really welcomes this, again, that cycle to be visible. So when kids come and fish here, there's a lot of fish actually, because we've actually sort of sadly baited it for them, for the fish anyway. Sad for the kids, it's very happy. So I'll end with just talking about two kind of really unique successes of this project. One is that it was $100 million of construction over those 6 blocks. The 6th block is really just a kind of temporary landscape with the marine infrastructure, so it doesn't have the same level of the finish as the rest. But we managed, working with the client team who gave it their all, to get what they call a TIFIA loan. It's a transportation-based infrastructure loan program that's really intended to kind of pay for toll bridges that eventually, through their revenue stream, can pay back the federal government, but here used as part of this public park project. And so the TIFI alone enabled the construction of the project, the $100 million. As part of it, as part of the condition of that loan, it has to be paid back by the city of Chicago to the federal government through revenues made in the project, not adjacent to the project, not elsewhere in the park system, in the project, which is really hard for 25 feet of land. But we're happy to say that over the first few years, as you can see from this revenue diagram, since the second phase and the third phase open, we've seen this doubling and really incredible growth of revenue based on the project's success. In fact, this week, and she was telling me that last year, before the pandemic, they had seen a $16 million revenue year. And so it's well on track to pay for itself, which is an incredible testament to the value actually of public space. In this case, that actually is paying for its own construction. And then lastly, last slide on Chicago, just to say a nod, I think that the truly spectacular gift that this project gave to the city, this is Carol Ross Barney's work of the underbridge connections, this kind of metal sheath that both protects pedestrians, but also reflects the water and makes light in what could be dark, scary spaces, is this idea that people, when they experience the Riverwalk for the first time, would email us and call and write to say, I experienced this river in a new way. I've never seen it this way. I always thought it was really just a, for industry. I didn't realize it was part of a natural system that I have access to. And so it's really transformed the relationship of the community to the river, and I hopefully built powerful stewardship for years to come. So that was our first story. I'll kick it over to Bree for a story at a much bigger scale in the White River.
Thank you, Gina. I like that Lisa had introduced you with your poker affinity, because I feel like your affinity for risk is part of that project too, and the willingness to try things like the wetlands or go all in with the loan. And now we'll zoom over a little bit to Indianapolis and that region and have a little bit of scale whiplash, I guess, as we go from 6 blocks to 58 miles of the White River, which moves through central Indiana, crossing through Indianapolis as sort of the urban center there, and then moves north into Hamilton County. It's a really different landscape, much more river. So we were really lucky to get to do this project as our first project for agency in 2018 with a wonderful team that was part of that regional leadership team from the Indianapolis Department of Metropolitan Development, from Visit Indy, and from Hamilton County Tourism. And that group is really leading the charge now on implementation today. Also a really deep kind of engagement and technical team you can see there. And although this was 58 miles, the charge that we were given was to think about it as one river and one vision, that these two very different counties, very different communities wanted to come together. They saw the future of the river as a real driving force for the success of the region, really have a strategy for generational redevelopment and thinking about the river. Oops, you can move ahead. Did it?
I think there might be a little lag, Bree. Are you seeing the principal slide?
Now I am, yes, thank you.
Okay.
And one thing that really tied together that kind of geography of difference was thinking about principles that everyone could rally around, whether it was some of the relevance to preserving places for everyone, really tied to the economic change and shifts that are happening in urban neighborhoods in Indy, or this really important idea of honoring land ownership for people who had been generational farmers in the North. So trying to find ideas that were both connective and continuous across the whole river, but also met individual needs. Do I have a little lag?
Yes, no, that was me. That was all me.
Okay, okay. I'm still not seeing the next one, but I'm wondering if I can, are you seeing the next one?
Yeah, I'm getting a little bit of voice bumpiness too, so it might be a connection issue.
Okay. And across that sort of diverse area, we really honed in on these, what we called river anchors. Also a little bit of a pun there, but a way for us to zoom in out of that 58-mile long scale and land in sites and think about design initiatives that could really catalyze investment in the river. And I liked how Gina described Chicago as, you know, it's not just a walkway with a series of spaces. This was not just a river or a trail. It was also a series of communities. And so we tried to think about what does each community need and where is the opportunity for the river to give that to them. And at the same time, to kind of land this idea as the opportunity at a grand scale. So it could be that type of generational change that, like the Chicago River, was long and continuous and had been so transformative for that community. This scale and initiative and opportunity was likewise huge. And that the river was natural and could draw on natural systems that were not just the narrow paths along it, but also this kind of 6,300 acres of natural areas that connected and impacted the river and its health. And then it was this opportunity for activation that was at a huge scale compared to the moments that they have right now. But thinking about, you know, this is a place that is home to NASCAR, that is thrilled to have implemented the Super Bowl. And so imagining the White Rivers plan as another type of opportunity for such large scale regional activation. But most importantly, I think for the plan and for the leadership is that it was shaped by over 13,000 voices over that 1.5-year process through a tremendous amount of meetings and engagement. That took us kind of from beginning to end, thinking about what those principles were and where those design opportunities were, and let us talk to all generations of users. And one kind of moment that really stuck with us from beginning to end, and we continue to come back to, was this idea of the generational memory and meaning of the river that people carried with them, even though in Indy today, the White River is known as really degraded, not a safe place to fish, not a safe place to take your kids. One person wrote about how he had a memory of, I think it was a she actually, she had a memory of her daddy who fished in the White River in the 30s and 40s, and that they would catch fish and fry them right there on the bank. So it sort of went from, you know, every step of the way. And then full circle that he wanted, it was so meaningful, he wanted his ashes to be brought back. And so, you know, that was kind of a rallying call for the team to think about how meaningful this place was with such minimal infrastructure, and how we could preserve that, but also amplify it for the future. And one of the things that was really central to that was thinking about water and the river itself as a driver. Right now, it's impeded by about 6 or 7 dams, depending on you know, which types you're counting. And so we looked at kind of 2 key ideas. One was to think about the river and its ability to manage flooding better for the region. But the second was to imagine it as a free-flowing river, which was really hard for people to picture, but really transformative. And that meant on the flooding side, you know, getting serious about both today's vulnerabilities, where there's already 6,500 buildings that are in the 100-year floodplain, but also the future, and having real conversations about climate change projections here and what that would mean for future vulnerability of these neighborhoods. And looking to the opportunity of the dams to become retrofit for recreation and being able to traverse them, both for people, but also the ecological benefits. That was a real value to the community and to a lot of the advocates around this project. And imagining that, you know, today you have to get in and out of the river 6 or so times just to traverse it within this stretch. And in the future, you could have one continuous trail. One place where these ideas really came together was way down at the southern tip of the study area. This is probably the largest nature preserve that we looked at and reimagined, a place where already it's the longest stretch of free-flowing river. And so it was a great place to start kind of galvanizing activities, getting more people into the water and activating it a little bit more with educational programming. So this, as we said, minimal infrastructure and support today, and imagining how with simple kind of programs, but also improvements, you could maintain the kind of opportunity for nature within the city, but also welcome more people and more experiences. And thinking about those experiences as more of a year-round opportunity, today the White River is really limited in what you can do in the colder months. So thinking about some history of extraction that had happened around the river, a lot of industry, a lot of quarries, many of which are being kind of retired and moving on. So recapturing some of those for future productive use for recreation, climbing, ice skating, large events, but thinking of those as sort of the next Lucas Oil Stadium. And moving back to downtown Indianapolis, a really interesting thing happened in the middle of the project, which is that one of those dams I was mentioning breached. And so there was this opportunity where it had to be repaired. It had to be built back just to have its usual function for power and production, and a real kind of opportunity of the plan and the timing to line that up instead with rebuilding it to allow these other activities. And so that dam is right there in the middle, and it's right across from Mosel Sanders Park, which is a really important park for a historically Black neighborhood. And you can see that today, that opportunity that happened to us halfway through the plan, not much of a gracious relationship to the river yet. But imagining that a place that had once been known as a beach could again become that for the neighborhood and could become a launch point for events and access right in the heart of Indy.
Thanks, Bree. And then our last story, quickly, this is ongoing work, different part of the world or different part of the country in the central part of Florida, central western Florida on the Gulf Coast, the Sarasota Bay Front. An incredible project that's really at the district scale. So we showed you Chicago, which is a site scale, and then the White River, which is regional. And then this is a project that's really operating kind of between the two. An incredible 53-acre site on the bay side of the Gulf Coast of Sarasota, Florida. And so a cultural district that was planned in the 60s, so very car friendly. About 75% of this site is covered in asphalt parking lots. And a grassroots organization called Bayfront 2020 that eventually became the Bay Park Conservancy started rallying that this site could serve more, that there wasn't a great signature waterfront park for this community, that there wasn't public access for an enlivened experience of the Bay anywhere in this community, even though it's really known for its waterfront in many ways. It's the best beach in America out on the barrier island. And so this grassroots organization of leaders grew up demanding something be done to make the site more publicly accessible because it is city-owned land. And so, you know, I fell in love with this site the first time I was here. The incredible expanse of sky that you see over the bay, the incredible experience of seeing the sunset over the bay with the islands in the distance, the incredible tropical vegetation and kind of tropical experience of the water, and a climate and an arts community there that's really like incredibly diverse and rich. This was interesting because it was a design team that I led as part of a team effort with Sasaki at my previous firm, and it actually have stayed on leading it through our transition into agency and continued to work on it with Sasaki in different configurations. And at the same time, working consistently over the last 3 years, really, with a deep and incredible implementation team, including HR&A advisors, and a technical team that includes Kimley Horn and Moffat and Nichols. These really deep wells of knowledge on the long-term life of this place and the technical change required. We entered into a master planning process that, like the White River, really sought to engage as many people in the community as possible. It's a small community, around 60,000 people, but we managed to touch at least 45,000, more than 45,000 individual moments. And that was through every form of engagement we could imagine, from online media to different meetings and presentations to social media to pop-up events. over the course of the initial master plan, we were out and about in that community more than any other community I've ever been part of a plan, both doing these large scale forums with the community that I think is the kind of mental demographic of Sarasota, kind of older boomer crowd, a lot of snowbirds that have moved there from elsewhere, but also really going deep into the community to church events and neighborhood events and youth organizations and beer and wine events, to just get to every different facet of this community over the course of 8 months. And I love showing this project, and we talk about it a lot as a real model of what designing with community looks like. A lot of times that's used in a way that somehow feels like it's lesser design, or it's described as not being as high design. And we think that actually the community gives us some of the best ideas and are really great partners in thinking about design. So we have lots of different ways we work with community. One way is through this exercise we call the hats. You force the community to wear different hats, and each hat only allows them to speak through one part of their experience. So when you're wearing green hats, you can only be your most creative, yes-saying self. And so you get everyone on the same page. No one can purple hat each other. Purple hat means you're shutting something down or critiquing it or being really kind of hard and thinking about the downside. Green hats are your most wildly, vividly, most bold self. And so we did this with the community. We would brainstorm, we would hear about their biggest and boldest dreams. We would start to put those ideas, kind of give them shape, start to think about, well, what would it look like if we chased that idea of like a deep ecological profile down? Or what if we talked about this idea of massive landform? Or what if we thought about these idea of bridging to the community? So we created these kind of buckets of ideas, and then use those as a way of starting to sketch through and think about different physical alterations and changes to the landscape. And so this was with the Sasaki team, really working through different ways of thinking about the buildings, the cultural buildings that exist on site, the natural resources, and how to start playing out these schemes. And as we like to do in our practice, when we talk about design and planning strategy, we love to give the community wildly different ways of thinking about a problem, and not asking them to vote on one or the other, but really to tell us what resonates most and why. Tell us what experiences you see inherent in one scheme versus another that really speaks to your desire or your needs on the site. So we had these 3 wildly different ideas, one that was about this massive landform, one that was about this kind of village, walkable village and an island park, and one that was really about bridging and connectivity. And ultimately the community weighed in. We were able to sort of understand those desires, those needs, and create this incredible transformation of the site. So moving away from a 75% gray to more of a 75% green idea of the site, changing the way the cultural institutions related to each other architecturally, and really welcoming these new flexible programming spaces for the community along the waterfront. And what's been really incredible is immediately out of that master plan, we've moved into a phase 1 design. The client team really wanted to make change as quickly as possible to show the community what was possible in physical terms, knowing that the whole transformation of the site will take many years. So we're designing this first kind of 12-acre community park on the waterfront. And this is the design as it stands. We're in construction documents right now. It's a small kind of 1-acre community lawn with a pavilion for food and beverage, a small garden space, a series of small kind of art spaces, and this spiral boardwalk that connects from the land out across and over the bay and then back again, that provides this kind of circuit around this existing mangrove. And this new experience of the waterfront, we think, will draw people here and be an incredible place to launch on an adventure on the waterfront. So here you see that looking towards the bay, again, always being inspired by the width of the bay and the incredibleness and the magic of its sunset, thinking about this place really being kind of a place to be, to experience that incredible natural experience. Really making sure that the architecture fits with a kind of Sarasota modern understanding of architecture and landscape, that it sits within the tropical landscape and creates something that's shady and lovely. That the boardwalk gives you this place to really experience those sunsets. It's in by nature that it's a circle, that it's a spiral. It actually gives you places along the whole edge to look at the changing sunset over the course of a given year, which we thought was a really beautiful way to think about it. And then also counterpoint to that, giving these really intimate experiences of places like this mangrove, which is a much more wild and natural experience, small scale overlooks in places. And this has been just a great joy. We're in the process of doing a whole series of small first phase. I think when you're a landscape architect, you get used to clients being impatient for the big long haul. And so you do these little projects. And right now we're working on a walkway and a series of interpretive seating opportunities. This is actually what we call the nest. It's a sitting space tucked within the mangrove, etched with mangrove leaves, and a story about mangroves written by our teammates that actually sits under an osprey nest. So it's making this connection between where people sit and experience the landscape and where our counterpoints in the sky do as well. And just add that it's been an incredible effort to try to build a project remotely during a pandemic. And so I like to say it takes a village. It's taken an incredible team of people that are all hands on deck. We're lucky to have a client who's a landscape architect and a design team that's incredibly collaborative, and local partners and Kimley Horn and a construction manager that really have kept us up to speed as our project races through construction with us here in Boston. So a really interesting experience of learning how to see construction administration through photographs and FaceTime, of working to send samples back and forth between our offices and the site and all of our partners across the country, and really working in a much more hands-on way with our construction manager to see through this project from a distance. So I think I think we did pretty well on time. And Lisa, if you're ready, yeah.
I'm ready. Thank you so much.
We didn't go really long, which is great. It was, nice to have some time to hear some of the questions and thoughts people had.
Absolutely. So I'll say quickly to the audience, please feel free to continue to add questions. We've got a couple to get us started, and then we'll keep moving. You spoke a lot about the importance of community and getting community feedback in your talk and all of your sites. And Rachel wrote in to ask, how do you ensure that you are reaching an indicative random sample when gathering data from or on a community that you're planning for?
I know Gina always likes me to answer those. I'll jump in first, and then I'm sure you have some ideas too. I think we do have some projects where we do a statistically valid survey, and that's really the only kind of precise way to make sure that it's that it holds up to what you're mentioning. And we'll do that often on larger kind of system-wide plans that are setting strategic direction for the community. But it doesn't get us to that question of the comments you saw about someone's dad and their memories of fishing in the river. We're not going to get those types of meaningful interactions. So we try to complement those two. We'll often have the statistically valid survey that gives us some kind of ideas or directions or kind of findings that are unique information, and then we can play those out further in these kind of more intimate conversations. We also try to track, every community is different, and every community is reached in different ways. And so we try to recalibrate and track as we go through the process, looking at who we've succeeded in reaching in the first phase, and then thinking about who we're not, more importantly, and what do we need to do differently? What other partners do we need to talk to people? And it really often comes down to having trusted partners in the community who can make the connection between us and a broader group that we're missing. So we try to kind of adjust as we go. We never end up where we think we're going to end up when it comes to engagement.
I was just going to add, Bree, thank you for taking that question. You're much better at it than I am. But I was also going to add, we really have a visceral response to the notion of voting in public, just the idea that design can be quantitative in that way, which is why I was talking a little bit about this idea of giving all wildly different alternatives, and then not just asking what do you like, but why, what do you see and hear that resonates with you? What looks appealing? So that gives us a lot more creative space then to come to a solution. And I think the response to voting is just that you don't get that sense of the why. And also it sort of minimizes that engagement, that direct conversation. And so, yeah, Brie, I think you're just right. It's like quantitative can get you so far, but you also need the sort of qualitative underbelly. And we had a client once who told us, it's really hard when you ask people about their positions and you don't ask them about their interests, that the interest is really what you want to surface. You really want to understand, what are they after? If you understand what they're after, there's more ways for you to solve that problem than asking them what their position is on something. And that always stuck with me. Mm-hmm.
Great. I think that segues into the next question that comes with an enthusiastic Bree and Gina, incredible presentation. This is from Jamie. Can you
the original lady boss? Sorry, I know who that is.
Oh no, I want to know more. Can you talk more about your work on equity, specifically the notion that quality design leads to gentrification?
Do you want to start this time, Gina, or?
I was just thinking about where we would start on that, Bree. I think that's a really, Jamie, look at you. Thought you were going to give us a softball. No. I mean, that's just the conversation on pretty much every project we're working on right now. I think it's hard sometimes to show the Chicago Riverwalk because we didn't know as much then what we know now about the way value is perceived and the way wealth is created through these projects. That one's a little bit unique because it's actually paying for itself. It's not just sort of like creating wealth for some general fund. It's actually going back into the project, which makes it different in a way. But I think that we formed agency because we wanted to not, disconnect design and considerations of equity. And we wanted to have those hard conversations about how the work we make changes communities over time and making sure the community is aware that change is coming and is part of that change and part of that dialogue, or sometimes part of saying that change isn't appropriate for us. And we need, I think the White River is a really nice example of saying there are ways of being understated and still presenting change in a positive way that still enables a certain kind of access and activation. So, I think that's why community engagement is so central to what we do, not just because we want to make sure we do that really well, because it's a bureaucratic box we check, but because we think that that's what's essential to making sure people are part of the process of change and, feel empowered to contribute to it. What do you think, Bree?
I think of a couple of projects too, like you said, Gina, it's sort of at the heart of most of it's a conversation on everything we're working on right now. And one in particular, Franklin Park here in Boston, which is Boston's largest park and Olmsted landscape, and sort of a few miles south of the downtown, but nestled within a really diverse set of neighborhoods, which have very different kind of income levels around kind of two different sides of the park. So we have an economic team member on the project who is looking specifically at this question and kind of is going to try with new methods to think about how do we consider what changes might mean in terms of value and neighborhood impact. And then we're also trying to actively think about how do any changes create opportunity in the neighborhood, especially around businesses and collaboration there. So not creating a new place that that brings in a new vendor from somewhere else, but that can be very locally tied. So looking at kind of local investment as a benefit. And then one other project we're just starting is in Portland, Oregon, and it's this neighborhood plan for an area called Albina. And Albina is kind of historic Black Portland. And I think we all know that in Portland, gentrification has happened. It's arrived, and especially in areas that are downtown and in the center. So that dispersal and displacement has already happened. And the question now is, can we welcome people back in, and can we create a neighborhood that does that? And that is done at the very beginning by thinking about wealth creation, and can you balance that with affordability, but taking on all those questions within the neighborhood planning process.
Great, thank you. Julian wonders, what landscape design technologies are you each most eager to implement in the age of COVID for public spaces? And he says, or they say, like the alternative seating in the mangroves.
Yeah, it's super. I'm such an optimist. I'm like, oh, we don't really have to change what we design because this is going to be over soon. So, but thank you for nudging me and reminding me that we don't know. I do think that we've seen a lot of change in the way public spaces are owned and operated. I think because we do a lot of system planning and we do a lot of public design work, we also can feel very deeply for the parks departments that are trying to maintain and operate these spaces. And, that the pandemic is happening at the same time we're having this racial justice movement really kind of light up across the country. It's causing all kinds of conversations in parks and in design that we think are really super essential. And it's been really amazing to watch it. So just as one example, I called one of my clients, Moore Square in Raleigh, that Bree and I both worked with, an incredible parks professional there. And I asked him how it was doing, does it look, 6 months into this pandemic? And he said, it's been a really hard time to be a parks manager and to have this park that just opened last year, because the complexities are so layered. You have on one hand, they didn't get out there and get the planting in shape in the spring because that's when the department was closed. And then on top of that, all of the social services are at capacity because they had to reduce the number of beds for people experiencing homelessness. That has an impact on the park. And then on top of that, you have protest and civic action happening, and the police, who normally would be part of that experience of keeping the park safe, are very sensitive and delicate about the way they're interacting with the public. So you have this, parks become this really incredible touch point for these major cultural issues that we're experiencing. So yes, I do think there's a lot to be said about designing flexible spaces that really enable large scale gatherings, but also have those intimate spaces as we weather this storm. But I think the bigger question that we're asking ourselves, and we always have, frankly, and want to continue, is, how do we think about parks in a way that they become the most welcoming and inclusive places for this broad cross section of people, and truly represent lots of different kinds of users, and make those users feel comfortable and welcome and safe. And so this year has been a real doozy for all of those questions. And so it's been kind of amazing to watch these spaces, even the Riverwalk too, tell you stories about how that's performed through the pandemic. $16 million of revenue last year is not anywhere near what they'll see this year. So yeah, incredible change.
Great. So Hannah has a question, and we'll take this one and possibly one more depending. Oh, sorry, Bree, did you want to respond to that?
Oh no, I was just getting ready.
You're ready for Hannah's. Okay. So she says, what an inspiring presentation. And she's got a couple questions, but I'm going to zero in on to what extent are community members aware of do you find that obviously you've worked in tons of different places, but to what extent would you say community members are aware of the natural resources and flora that make their place unique? And how is this quality of phenomenology integrated into your work?
Oh, that's such a great question, Bree. I'll take that one. See, I won't take the statistical because I'll botch those. I think I love that question because I wanted to show you guys the nest tonight, because it's this little piece of design that I think is really sublime. And it really speaks to something I think about a lot in design, which is that these clients often want us to interpret nature. They want us to put a sign that explains, or something that explains what you're seeing. And it's an intellectual way of thinking about experiencing natural systems. And I really think that there's this other thing that we need to do maybe as well, or instead of, which is give people really visceral, powerful physical experiences of that nature and what it does. So that the osprey nest and the idea of making a nest for humans at its base was just that, that you could start to have empathy for this animal that's up that you can see while lounging because you're in this parallel situation tucked into this mangrove. And so, I think, I don't know, to your question about like how much people see and value the ecosystems that they're part of, but I think there's a way as designers we can make that more present for them and do it in a way that's more memorable and more bodily. So your phenomenological question really speaks to that. How do you make people stop and think and experience the wonder of the sunset, of an ecological habitat that's unique and rich. And so, Sarasota is going to have a lot of that kind of work. I hope it does build stewardship. I think that's the big goal.
I want to add one more
please.
thought to that too, which is this project that we did a plan for Chinati Foundation. It's an an art institute in far west Texas that was formed by Donald Judd. For those who haven't made it all the way out there, hours from anything, but really just this incredible landscape, high desert landscape. And what was interesting is that for so long, the museum has been dedicated to the vision of Donald Judd, who appreciated the landscape, but didn't understand how it worked, how it operated, the ecology, the kind of connectedness, and the choices that they were making around maintenance were around the art, some of the visitor experience, but not really about the health of the landscape. And so it was a great conversation to think about how do they become stewards of that landscape in a different way. And what's been interesting in the couple of years since we've done that is they've started to fold that in a lot more to interpretation and kind of education, everything from youth education to some of what they're doing on site. So that was a fun experience, I think, where people sometimes understand some of it, but don't understand the full breadth. And that's where a design can think about how do we introduce more of that.
Great. Well, I think that's a great time to wrap up. A lot to think about. Thank you so much, both of you, for such an inspiring talk. And thanks to the audience for joining in. The final talk in this series will be with Walter Hood, who is the founder and creative director of Hood Design Studio in Oakland, California. That's going to take place Thursday, October 29th. So please register if you're interested. We're also kicking off our landscape design student and alumni series of talks tomorrow with renowned garden writer and designer Paige Dickey. That will take place at 1 p.m. Eastern. So check out our website, nybg.org/adulted for more information. And Bree and Gina, thank you so much for being with us. It was fantastic.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you for having us. And thanks everyone for joining.
Have
a great night, everybody.